Trump's Attorney General Bill Barr putting out real timelines today under oath to the Congress, saying he will release some version of the Mueller report within a week.
My original timetable of being able to release this by mid-April stands. Within a week, I will be in a position to release the report to the public. I do think it's important that the public have an opportunity to learn the results of the special counsel's work.
Now, this release, of course, is the center of maybe one of the biggest fights of the entire Trump presidency, because Barr has said he's going to make up his own mind about redacting all sorts of things from the report. Now, the House Democrats, who you may recall have already said they're willing to subpoena the whole thing, they want the full report, no redactions, including this important grand jury material, which is sometimes referred to as 6E under the federal rules of procedure. Take a look.
We intend to redact information.
Will we have the complete report?
You mean the unredacted report?
Mm-hmm.
No.
What if they just want to see the report?
Take, classified information. I can envision.
You have an intelligence committee for that.
The Congress doesn't get 6A.
This is what drives the public crazy when they see something like this.
We will color code the excisions from the report.
You heard that right. It is color coding excision time. What you see on your screen is something we've gotten used to, the sometimes very large black box redactions in all sorts of filings in the current era, things that Mueller was often redacting because he was not done with his probe. Now what we're hearing tonight here, brand new from the Attorney General, is that Barr may take the Mueller report and turn it into, yes, taste the rainbow, a veritable rainbow of redactions. So we're going to get a whole feel of what that looks like. We don't know. I don't think we know exactly which colors go for which. I'm voting pink for 6E. Now, all levity aside, Barr also made other headlines today with some statements that sounded conflicting, because he claimed his office did not give the White House a heads up about his 4-page summary of Mueller's report. Then he corrected and said, well, Trump did have reason to know it was coming.
Was the president or anyone at the White House alerted in advance of your letter's release?
The March 24th letter, I don't believe so. And I checked with my staff and was told that just before the letters were out, we did advise the White House counsel's office. We notified them before we issued them. I think it may have been read to them.
The letter may have been read over the phone, he mentions. There is earlier reporting about that, but this is significant because you have the Attorney General testifying to Congress under oath and penalty of perjury about these notifications. In an era of a lot of nothing matters and who cares and what's really going to happen, this is another example of how the congressional oversight process, the under oath testimony, matters. We're learning very specifically about what Barr did and didn't do, how he kept Donald Trump, who is, of course, impacted by all this, in the loop. And one more thing we're going to show you, which is what Barr really meant about all of his name-checking of Bob Mueller. If you've watched the beat coverage, you may know that from day one, we noted that there was a lot of lawyerly dancing going on. Barr trying to invoke Mueller in all sorts of ways that would seem to redound to his benefit as an attorney general working closely with this celebrated special counsel. But here, again, why it matters, under oath, we see, under questioning, Barr revealing Mueller himself did not play a role in drafting any of those letters from Barr, which at times mentioned Mueller.
Mr. Mueller's team did not play a role in drafting that document, although we offered him the opportunity to review it before we sent it out, and he declined that.
He declined. That's something I want to ask our talented panel about. Michelle Goldberg from the New York Times, Michael Steele from the RNC back in the day, and Jon Flannery from federal prosecutorial offices. Great to see all of you. Jon, right out of the gate, your interpretation of the stated fact that Mueller declined to review a letter that he couldn't control from Barr.
Well, you've said it. He couldn't control it. He didn't want to approve it. He didn't want to give it any sanction. And so the Da Vinci of deception continues with his multicolored proposal. And you talked about the colors. The grand jury testimony, on the one hand, he says in direct result of a question about the ACA, the Obamacare, that why don't you trust the courts? Well, he's not prepared to trust the courts because he doesn't want to lose control of what a court might do, which is to do a SORICA and to release the material. So I think if we want to straighten this out, you know, sure, subpoena Barr, but I think we should be going straight to the court and asking them to release it for all the reasons that these things have been released in the past.
Now, Michael, you know that Jon Flannery is fully loaded, Herbie fully loaded, as the saying goes, when he says pull a SORICA, referring to the judge who famously oversaw the Watergate case and did get that grand jury material released. Now, what do you think of the Washington politics of this, Michael? Because Barr has very adroitly done a lot of Mueller flirting, if you want to call it that. But I will credit that under oath, as he should be, he is accurate. He does not flirt to the point of saying, well, Mueller really was in on this, because he was asked a direct question and he coughs it up. Actually, no, Mueller, who's a smart lawyer himself, said, why am I going to get pulled into something that I can't really control? You want to know what I think? Read my report.
Right, and I think that that's the essence of this. But here's where the Washington story starts, and it's been fascinating to see how people respond to it, Ari. Everyone's caught up with the speed with which all of this is occurring, and that's the ruse. We just put this stuff out here very quickly, but it belies what is released. So, you know, the speed of releasing stuff is one thing. What they are releasing is the important stuff that matters, and so folks have kind of gotten fixated and caught up in that, and I think what you're seeing now, and to the point that was just made, there are workarounds. You can go about getting what you need from the Mueller report, because we've seen how this has played out in prior history. So this is not some big, you know, Machiavelli, you know, difficult thing to do. You just go to the court and say, hey, we'd like to have this report fully available to the American people. The 6E section of the grand jury testimony, we have no problem with that being made public.
Well, and Michael,
and move on from there.
Isn't that what Bill Barr wants? I mean, at the end of the day, I heard, I don't know if you heard this, I heard the whole report is really good news for Donald Trump, total exoneration. I heard maybe some parts of it are written in caps, that it's actually just a series of Trump tweets. If it is as good as Donald Trump and Barr initially said, why are they hiding it? Right. I present that for your analysis and Michelle's under the category of obvious questions on the beat.
Well, yeah, right, because none of what you just said is true. That's why. And the fact of the matter is, and this is where Mueller was pretty slick about it. He's like, okay, here it is. So now the political pressure is not on Mueller. It's on the administration, and particularly the Attorney General, to do right by this, because you have an aggressive oversight function taking place simultaneously that is putting that added pressure on the Attorney General to get this right out of the box. And as you saw today from the testimony, he had some difficulty at various times doing that.
You know, I think that what they've been able to do, one of the great hopes for the Mueller investigation was that it would give us some sort of common set of facts, right? That it would provide some clarity in the midst of this, you know, phantasmagorical derangement that we've all been living in for the last 2 years. And they've already sort of assured that that won't happen. You know, first by the way they rolled it out with this extremely misleading summary that they then said was not a summary, and I think quoted something like 24 words of actual Mueller text in this document. So they've and allowed sort of this fictitious narrative to take place, this fictitious narrative to get legs, something that apparently so distressed members of this Mueller team that have never leaked, that finally led them to leak, because this kind of, you know, pushed them over the edge. And so what they're going to do now is sort of dribble it out in a way that, again, will kind of confuse people, will shape the narrative to Trump's advantage. You know, hopefully, eventually, through litigation or some other means, this whole document will come out. But I think by then, there's going to be so much confusion and so many, as, you know, Kellyanne Conway might say, alternative facts, that, you know, Bill Barr has really exploded any chance of creating a sort of consensus about what happened in the way that the Nixon impeachment led to a consensus about what happened in Watergate.
Well, I think you make such an important point. You're talking about facts, which we draw from evidence and information, and you're talking about time. And I think Bill Barr understands where Washington and True Detective meet, because time can be a flat circle in the Beltway where yesterday's conventional wisdom is today's expertise until and unless something replaces it. And he is a master of that. And again, I've said this before, I'm going to say it again as part of our coverage. We have no evidence that he has broken any DOJ rules, let alone laws. We are talking about the transparency, the ethics, the honor, if you will, of his handling of a very important thing, which is an investigation that touches on the White House and what that means for America. We're not saying that the evidence shows that he broke the rules. With that in mind, for your further analysis on the flat circle, if you will, to your point, let's take a look at him on the exoneration today, because he's pressed on this under oath, this attempt that he made to cherry pick references to shape views, as you say, before we had the report. Take a look.
Can you elaborate on what is meant by does not exonerate the president?
I think that's the language from the report.
Right, I understand that.
Well, that's a statement made by the special counsel.
You can't opine, after having read the report yourself, why it reaches that conclusion that it does not exonerate the president.
That's right.
Almost down to a whisper, Michelle, but an interesting exchange, and it's telling, no?
Well, and one of the things that I think we're still not clear about is whether it doesn't reach a conclusion on obstruction of justice because the evidence wasn't sufficient or because DOJ regulations say the sitting president cannot be indicted. And so this evidence would be a matter for Congress to evaluate, right? And if this is a matter for Congress to evaluate, that makes it all the more urgent and all the more sort of shameful that they would then try to circumvent Congress in getting this information.
Flannery?
I think that we should replace the flat circle with a sphere, and it should be mauve. But I think that insofar as they say this is grandeur...
What's a mauve sphere?
A mauve sphere is the redaction element of one of the colors. They might choose cobalt blue or burnt sienna.
Oh, my God, that's incredible. Michael, did you get... the redaction joke went right over my head.
Seriously?
Well, you started it with your flat circle. I mean, come on. But the color of the portion of the redaction, which may cover the whole page, and we don't like New York Basic Black, apparently, could be chicken yellow, because he has the option to go to the court, and he's not going there. What is he afraid they're going to rule the right way, which is release this stuff, particularly after the charade that he's put on about his summation of the report, except for the fact that he gave his opinion about the report, which is, don't worry about it, this guy didn't do anything, he didn't obstruct anyone, and rely on my memo of a year ago, which, if you read the cites and so forth, they don't support the propositions in the memo. A first-year law student in legal method would get a D for what he wrote. But because he is accepted in the elite of the alt-right Republicans and those who support Trump, it's given credibility, and they pass him on from the Senate to this position, and he does exactly what we expect him to do. I know that you think that he's doing well, but I think the fact that we're talking about how he's trying to deceive us tells us he's not doing that well. And I hope the day of reckoning comes soon.
And you understand what I'm saying. As a journalist, I'm trying to hold DOJ accountable. It's part of my job. I'm also I'm noting that within the rules, Michael, he has clearly taken aggressive communications positions, and it is important to distinguish that, which is, as I say, lawful but questionable, from, say, potential obstruction that we've seen, where people have literally been convicted of lying to the FBI or the president calling people rats. Barr is not in that camp. I give the final word to you, Michael. Flannery has taken us here to be, I hate to say it. No, I don't. Flannery has taken us full circle.
If you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by a knave to make a trap for fools. That's what we're dealing with.
Shakespeare?
Well,
Kipling.
Let's talk about that circle.
Michael, we're full circle because we're talking about tasting the rainbow of redactions.
Right.
I
And
wouldn't
so
touch hip
this
hop.
is-
This is the best I can do.
Look. We as they say, we end where we began, and the fact of the matter is, all of this boils down to the simple truth that at the end of the day, Barr has the ultimate power and control, and that is the ability to redact, whether it's pink, mauve, purple, or yellow. The fact of the matter is he's established the narrative at the time of the 4-page release. He has now continued that narrative and will continue that narrative at the time of the full document release. And the truth will lie within those colored redacted parts.
Right.
And that's the nub of this. And unless he goes to a court and gets that judge to say, release the whole thing, we will forever live in his interpretation of complete exoneration of the president.
I think you put it very well, and skilled lawyers can interpret their way far afield from what the underlying evidence might say.
That's right.
That's literally what they build careers on.
That's right.
And the question then is, with this rainbow of redaction, which is it funny ha-ha, or is it funny cover-up? And is it going to look like Flannery's bow tie, where there's a little bit of white and a lot of other colors covering up what the evidence was? Having beaten this into the ground, I'm going to take a break. Flannery, Steele, yes. Goldberg, like a law firm. My thanks to each of you, and we'll have you back as we really get the answers from Barr within a week. Right. His new timeline. Thanks to you guys. Right. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.